Hey, what's up guys? Mr. Sproggy here again. This week's homework is going to be focusing on the quadratic formula again because I really want to make sure you guys understand the importance of this. So first of all, what is the quadratic formula? What is it used for? It's used to find all the x-intercepts or roots or zeros of a parabola or quadratic function. So when you see quadratic formula, you can use that to factor quadratic formulas, or you can use it to find intercepts of a parabola, so where the parabola touches the x-axis. So before we dive into it, let's go ahead and just take a look at the formula as a whole. So we have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and that's all over 2a. Make sure you have this fraction bar going underneath the entire numerator. Okay. So we want to know how many times does our parabola touch the x-axis, or how many factors does our quadratic function have. In order to do this, we're going to focus on the discriminant, which is the part that I also highlighted in the formula. That's going to be the part under the square root. If you solve this first, you do b squared minus 4ac, then you will be able to determine how many roots there are. If your answer is positive, you will get 2 intercepts. If you get an answer of 0, you'll get 1 intercept. And if you get a negative answer, there are no intercepts. So let's go ahead and look at an example. We want to factor this equation, x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. So first and foremost, let's check that it's in standard form, and the answer is yes. This is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And our a term, let's go ahead and identify our a, b, and c. Since there's nothing in front of our x squared, we're going to say there's an invisible 1 here. So a equals 1, b equals 6, and c equals 8. Now let's go ahead and rewrite that quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. That's all over 2a. And now we're going to do substitution. We're going to substitute all of these quantities in for their constants. So the a, b, and c, we're going to replace those with numbers. So a is going to be replaced with 1. And when we're replacing them, we want to make sure we use parentheses so that we know that we're multiplying those two values. I see another a here. I'm going to replace that with 1. I see b is 6, so I'm going to replace all my b's with 6 with parentheses. And lastly, c is 8. Okay, so now I've plugged in all of my values, and I'll be able to solve my quadratic formula. Before we do that, let's go ahead and try to figure out how many intercepts there are. To do this, let's focus on the discriminant. That's going to be the part inside the square root. So let's solve our discriminant. That's going to be 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 8. Okay, this is going to be 36 minus 32, which equals 4. So because 4 is positive, how many roots are there? Good, there are 2 roots, or 2 intercepts. Okay. We can now solve our quadratic formula to figure out what are those intercepts. So I have x equals negative 6 plus or minus the square root. The thing inside the square root we just calculated, that was 4. So instead of writing all that mumbo jumbo there, I'm just going to write 4. And that's all over 2 times 1, or just 2. Keep in mind we have to do our order of operations. So keeping to simplifying, we have negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 4 is 2. And that's all over 2. And this plus or minus symbol here tells us that we're going to get 2 different answers, which also implies we have 2 intercepts. Okay, so I have the positive version and I have the negative version. So one answer is negative 6 plus 2 over 2. And the other answer is negative 6 minus 2 over 2. Let's go ahead and simplify. I get negative 4 over 2, which equals negative 2. And over here I get negative 8 over 2, which equals negative 4. And guess what? These are our x-intercepts. X-intercepts. We can write this in factored form as x minus our x-intercepts. So this would be x minus negative 2 times x minus negative 4. And those of you already seeing it, we do simplify this. We can take care of those double negatives. This turns into x plus 2 and x plus 4. If we were to do our box method to check our work, x plus 2, x plus 4, I get x squared plus 2x plus 4x plus 8. I see some like terms here. And that means I can combine in my answer, get x squared plus 6x plus 8, which is our starting formula, x squared plus 6x plus 8. So we checked our work, we were able to factor it using the quadratic formula, and we were able to check our work using the box method. Now there is a quicker way to solve some factoring problems, but quadratic formula will always work. So if you don't know what method to use, you can always use the quadratic formula. A quicker way that we could have done this problem was doing the x method. 8 on top, 6 on bottom. Two numbers that multiply to get 8 and add to get 6 are 4 and 2. Check it out. There's our magic numbers 4 and 2 again. Okay, so what does all this information do? We used our quadratic formula to get those x-intercepts of negative 2, 0, and negative 4, 0. Those are our x-intercepts. And if I were to graph this equation, x squared plus 6x plus 8. On Desmos, we see that this parabola clearly crosses this x-axis twice. And what are those two numbers? Oh, look at that, negative 4 and negative 2. Okay, so Desmos is a tool that you guys can use to quickly check your work, but I want you to be able to solve this by hand. Okay, you have to understand, first of all, memorizing the quadratic formula, which is right here. And you have to know how to plug in numbers, making sure you do order of operations, understand the discriminant that tells you how many roots there are, and just make sure you do your algebra correctly. Okay, so let's go ahead and do another example where we see a parabola with one x-intercept. So let's call this example 2. Let's have x squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 0. Let's set up our quadratic formula. So we have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay. Let's identify our a, b, and c. A is going to be 1 because there's a 1 here. B is going to be 6. And C is 9. Okay, let's substitute all of those values in. So I'll replace C with a 9 in parentheses. I'll replace all my B's with a 6. And I'll replace all of my A's with a 1. Okay. So now we have our quadratic formula. We got rid of all the A, B, and C's, and now we just have numbers, so we can solve it. Let's first calculate what the discriminant is. Again, that discriminant is this value on the inside. So let's calculate that. discriminant we have 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. This gives me 36 minus 36, which equals 0. So if my discriminant is 0, let's go ahead and highlight this so we know where it came from. My discriminant is 0. How many x-intercepts do we have? Good, we have one x-intercept. One x-intercept. And now let's go ahead and solve our quadratic formula. So I have x equals -6 plus or minus square root of, what is the inside of the square root equal? We solved that, that's 0. All over 2 times 1. And this equals -6 plus or minus 0, that doesn't change anything. So that's just divided by 2, which is -3. So that means our only x-intercept is -3, 0. And if I compare this to our last graph, we have x squared plus 6x plus, this time we have 9. Let's go ahead and compare those two graphs. Okay. So our new graph, it touches the x-axis exactly one time at -3, 0, and we calculated that. And the only difference between this problem and the last problem is we changed that 8 to a 9. And so changing that 8 to a 9, that shifted the graph upwards. So the blue parabola had two x-intercepts, and the green parabola had only one. Okay, let's do one more problem, an example of where our x-intercept is doesn't exist, where we have no x-intercepts. So let's do example 3. Let's do x squared plus x, I'm gonna hide this, plus 5. Okay, so x squared plus x plus 5 equals 0. Okay, let's set up let's identify our a, b, and c. A is 1, b is also 1, and c is 5. Okay, let's set up our quadratic formula. X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and that's all over 2a. And we're going to substitute our values. In this example, luckily, a and b are both 1. So let's replace a's and b's with 1, making sure we use parentheses. And then we have to replace our c value with 5. Okay, that is our quadratic formula for this problem. And let's go ahead and solve our discriminant. Our discriminant is the thing inside the square root. Let's solve that. So I have 1 squared, which is 1, minus 4 times 1 times 5 is 20. This equals -19. I have a negative discriminant, which means how many x-intercepts do I have? That's right, I don't have any x-intercepts. No x-intercepts. Okay. We can still factor this, but this is going to get into what we call complex numbers, which is something that you guys will learn in Algebra 2. I'll give you guys a little sneak peek. We have x equals -1 plus or minus the square root of -19 all over 2. Since we have this square root of a negative number, for now we're just going to leave our answer like that. Okay. So this would be your final answer for the x-intercepts. And if we notice for this most recent problem, if I were to graph it, This parabola does not touch the x-axis, so there are no x-intercepts. Okay, I will upload this onto Google Classroom, and I want you guys to write a one-page summary, taking note on writing down what the quadratic formula is. So writing down the quadratic formula, that's this thing right here. What it is used for, so it's used to find all of the x-intercepts. I want you to describe the discriminant in your own words. And I want you to solve these 3 problems again on your own paper. I will write them again at the end. So homework. So first is write down quadratic formula. Describe what it does. Let's keep it blue. 3, write down formula for discriminant. Describe what the discriminant tells us. And then you have to do our 3 example problems. X squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. X squared plus 6x plus 9 equals 0. And x squared plus x plus 5 equals 0. So if you've watched this entire video, I went through all of these answers. All you have to do is write down your thought process or in your own words. You may write this by hand or you may type this on the computer, and please submit it to me by this Friday. So due Friday, that's going to be the 15th. All right, good luck.